and continuing to be technically challenged, Ask the College Experts series. Thanks for joining us tonight. If you haven't participated in one of these before, apparently I need to move to get in the middle of the camera. I'm Ann Garcia. I'm a fee-only financial advisor and partner at Independent Progressive Advisors in Portland, Oregon. I write a blog called The College Financial Lady, where I help families plan for affordable college education. And I'm a mom to twins who are college freshmen, so I'm right in the thick of all of this myself. I get a lot of questions on my blog and from people who follow me on Facebook or on Twitter about topics that are outside the scope of my expertise. So I started this weekly series where I talk to other people who are experts in those areas where I get questions. And today I'm talking to Victoria Payne, who's the founder of Boxcar Writing Labs. Victoria has helped hundreds of people define what makes them different. After 20 years teaching writing to university students, today she has her own business where she works with individuals and businesses to identify a central narrative to reach their ideal audience. Her storytelling methods collected in her book, Write Big, from college application essay to storytelling standout, have helped college-bound students receive acceptances at top universities throughout North America and thousands of dollars of scholarships. So Victoria, thank you so much for spending this rainy Tuesday evening with me. So today I was listening to a webinar with the UChicago Dean of Admissions, who's a really entertaining guy, and he talked quite a bit about essays. And he mentioned that UChicago, like most private schools, requires 3 essays. In their case, it's a personal statement, an oddball question, and then a why UChicago. And he said basically the university is trying to get at 3 things with those essays. So who you are comes from the personal statement. And how do you engage with the concept comes from the wacky question. And their wacky question, to give you some examples of past wacky questions, where's Waldo? There are 2 types of people in the world, what are they? So things like that. And then are you a fit for this school comes from the why UChicago. And so of course there's a lot we could talk about there, but there's a math problem as I see it. If you look at it, at 3 essays per school, students can very quickly find that essay writing is a full-time job. So my daughter, for example, applied to 8 schools, and between her college application and her scholarship applications, she wrote almost 30 essays. So what tips do you have for managing that process?
Okay, so I know maybe are you able to hear me, Ann? Whoops. Are you able to hear me, Ann?
Yes.
Okay. So I kind of need feedback. So I think I'm going to ask you a question by hanging up. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear me though. But I don't know how else to minimize. Can you hear me anymore? No. Okay. Okay, so I'm putting you on mute while I'm answering it.
Okay.
Okay, so yes, that is a great question. There are potentially a lot of essays that students need to write, and if you are ambitious enough to apply to multiple colleges, you have an advantage to want to manage your time, and you need to be able to work in advance. So I think really understanding deadlines. Most people understand that there's a primary essay that students write, either we call it the common application essay or the college application essay, depending on what application system a school is using. So most students understand that they're going to be writing one big essay. But to your question, what students can really underestimate is how many additional essays or essay questions that they're going to need to answer. And so my first tip for students and for families is to really make sure that you have a good count of how many essays that you're going to be writing. One of the ways that you can do that is by taking a look at the common application and going to additional writing. So many times on the common application, for example, the additional writing might not be listed under what's called a writing supplement. So you really have to poke around, and that is really, the onus is really on the student. to find that out. How many additional pieces of writing am I going to do? And it's really a game of really working in advance. So students that are ambitious and want to apply to multiple colleges, 8 or more, for example, they really need to be starting in the summertime and making sure that they are getting as much writing out of the way as they can, as early as they can. So you can always do the main essay as soon as the Common Application essay confirms their prompts for the year, which is usually in the late spring or early summer. And then by August 1st, generally colleges have released what's called their college writing supplement. So the best way of managing it really is to really understand what's being asked of you. And after that, being able to work in advance and manage your time. And then the other thing is you're really put your most effort towards the schools that are your top selections, because otherwise you can spend a lot of effort, writing answers for schools that you might consider your fallback schools, but it's really your primary schools, the schools you really want to get into, that you need to spend the majority amount of time for those writing supplements. Are we on a delay?
Yeah, so that's a great idea. So Victoria helped my daughter write her college essays, and it was a huge help. And to your point about doing the ones that matter first, she applied to 4 schools that accepted less than 10% of applicants. Mm-hmm. And the 2 that she got into were the 2 that she wrote her essays for first. Mm-hmm. And I think by the time she was doing the essays for the other 2, she was just kind of fed up with it, mm-hmm. Which isn't an awesome place to be as a student. So, talking about the essay writing process, what suggestions do you have for parents who want to be helpful, to have them be helpful without taking over the process? Still letting the student be the essay writer, having an essay that's written by a 17-year-old, not a 45-year-old.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a really great question. So I think that if parents want to be helpful, it's first helpful to educate yourself about what a college application essay is. It's not a resume, and it's not your student's opportunity to brag about all of their accomplishments. And this could be a huge disappointment for parents who are really proud of their student and feel like their college application essay is their chance to grab the microphone and talk about how terrific and wonderful they are. And your student is terrific and wonderful, but there's places where that goes in the college application essay, but it's usually not the topic that they're writing about. So I think step 1 for parents is just make sure that you understand what a college application essay is. How I like to explain it is that besides your students' grades and their test scores, they really only have a couple other pieces of their college portfolio that allow them to be human. And that one of the ways that happens is through teacher recommendations. But the big way that it happens is when they get the chance to really talk for themselves. So your student needs to sound like a high school student. They shouldn't sound like a 45-year-old parent with a master's degree. So you need to be comfortable with your students sounding a little naive and clumsy, and that can be hard for parents. And even when your students are applying for very challenging schools, yes, the essay needs to be written in a way that demonstrates their effort and their professionalism and their originality, but in many ways it won't be perfect and it won't sound like how you or I would write it. So the best way parents can help is really just getting out of your own way. This is your students' opportunity to talk and write for themselves. They are, the only way that they're really going to blow it is if they don't take their opportunity seriously. So as a parent, you can help educate them about the importance of the college application essay and the role that it plays. and then provide them with lots of resources. You can offer to be a proofreader, but it's very hard for parents even to play that role because we want to kind of take over. And so I think you have to just gauge your students' willingness for feedback. There's it's applying to college cannot be divorced from the fact that your child is potentially leaving home and maybe moving kind of far away. So parents and students' emotions are really on edge. And many times students are trying to break free from the sort of the role that they have in their families while they are writing their college application essay. It's not like the two things necessarily go together. It's just that the timing in their life is that's what's happening, is they're trying to imagine their future and break away, and they're also writing this essay. So from a story coach point of view, that's all money in the bank for me as a story coach, because we can harness that emotion and we can talk about the future in a way that can incentivize them to work hard and to tell a compelling story. But for parents, that can be really difficult. So I think, just decide what role you're going to play. Make sure that your student is comfortable with that. And don't make your student write about something that's going to make you happy, because students often choose topics and I can't figure out why they're so attached to them. And then it turns out that if they don't write it, their parents are going to be mad. So that's not, not what you want for your students. So if you are going to entrust your student with their high school counselor, with a college coach, or with a story coach like me, really trust the people that you've decided to work with them, and enjoy your last year potentially of your child being at home.
So it's time you need to practice letting go.
Yeah, I know it's not the answer you probably
Now,
want.
what about editing typos and stuff like that? Are we okay to do that?
Yeah, your student probably needs you to do that. Yeah. So you, yes. So if you are, well, okay. First of all, another self-assessment. If writing isn't your strength, then you might want to also kind of farm that out to somebody who is better at editing. So first, kind of know like, hey, how great am I at commas before you start correcting your students' commas. But yeah, parents are great for proofreading, for suggesting other words, brainstorming, being a second pair of eyes, being an audience. Those are all ways that parents can be really helpful.
Okay, and the other thing, we can't stop talking about essays without addressing the elephant in the room. It seems like there's so much emphasis on writing something unique, and yet here we are at a point when everyone on earth is going through the same exact thing. What guidance would you give to students who want to write their essay on something related to their coronavirus experience?
Yeah. So I've given this a little bit of thought, and I feel like if you have a momentous experience that you feel like would make that's related to what's happening right now in the world, then that you can write about that. I never like to tell somebody don't write about something, because sometimes you might eliminate a really good topic. I do think you're going to have to find a unique angle, knowing that so many people are writing about it. I would say that it's in the category of like writing about a sport, or like writing about a mission trip, or writing about some kind of volunteer activity. Is same idea. We just have to find your unique angle. I would say to remember that coronavirus is not your topic, but your topic is something else, and it somehow relates to the context of coronavirus. But for the most part, unless you maybe do want to go into, I don't know, like biomolecular studies or technology, then you don't want to make the virus itself your topic, or even like your experience with the virus your topic. It's almost like the coronavirus potentially is the context for the story that you have to tell. Maybe your story is more about connecting with your family. Maybe your story is about the walks that you took with your dog. So I would say, think of the pandemic, think of the stay at home, think of coronavirus, think of what's happening right now as almost like a muse for topics that are coming to your attention. So I would say maybe don't make it your topic, but use the situation to help expose to you things that you care about, things that you value, things that have been rising to the surface that maybe were there before, but they weren't getting your full attention because you were really busy. And for a lot of students, you've had very meaningful activities, sports and extracurriculars and jobs that have been put on hold. So I would say go shopping first in those topics and how they've been impacted by this change and how maybe your identity has been impacted by this change versus thinking like what's happening right now is the topic. It's all about kind of angle, I would say.
So I would say a couple other things that came out of Dean Nondorf, who's the U Chicago admissions dean, with respect to essays. He's the first one, and he's a super entertaining guy. He said, if you're not funny, don't write a funny essay. And he said, if you are going to write about coronavirus, assume that we already know that coronavirus happened.
Yeah.
Yeah. He was saying they get all kinds of inquiries from students who are like, oh yeah, because this thing is happening, whatever. It's like and they're done that.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. I think on the flip side of that, writing your essay about something that's happened recently that doesn't mention the current context at all can feel a little disingenuous. But I think we're all really grappling with that, and I think I think there will and should be some grace for students who are trying to figure out how to talk about themselves when there's such a big shift. I mean, as adults, we're experiencing it ourselves. So I wanted to ask you, I don't know if I'm caught up with you yet, but I wanted to ask you some questions too, because I know that.
So if you're listening to this, I can't hear Julia, so I have to wait for what, I can't hear Victoria, so I have to wait for what she says to come through on Facebook. So.
Okay, I'll keep talking then. So yes, so my question for you is, the way you help families that's also really being affected right now with coronavirus. And I know that some families are thinking about taking a gap year and instead of going to college next year and or delaying college. And what kind of advice do you have for families on that topic?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and a lot of people are asking it. And I would say, so just as every school, just as every school is making their own set of plans about whether they're going to reopen or how they're going to even make that decision, they're also each making their own policies about students either, deferring admission or students who are already attending, taking time off or going to school locally or all the different things that people are thinking about. So I think really your best bet is to communicate directly with your school and find out what their policy is. A couple of things in particular that you want to find out. Number one, if you choose to say take classes from your local community college or another local school, will the credits that you get transfer and not just transfer, but will they count towards graduation requirements, or will they just be gen ed credits? A lot of students don't need additional gen ed credits to graduate, so If that's all you're going to get from taking classes somewhere else, then you might be better off, finding a job, doing a volunteer project, getting involved in the election, something else to fill your time. Another important question is, how would doing this impact the student's financial aid? So a lot of schools will adjust financial aid offers, in particular if the student's going to take classes somewhere else, which people seem to be talking more about, why don't I just get some classes out of the way more cheaply versus, gap year experiences, given that most of those are somewhat off the table as well. But a lot of schools will adjust a student's financial aid offer based on them going to school somewhere else. Another important consideration is course sequencing. So a lot of majors have really specific sequences of courses that you have to take. And so if you're thinking that you're not going to go to school in the fall, there may be a class that you have to take in the fall. And if you don't take it in the fall, you can't take the next class in the sequence in the spring, and so on. And oftentimes those classes are only offered one term each year. So it's really it's really an individual decision, both between what your school's policies on this are and then what requirements you may need to meet for your major. So I think students who go that route without consulting with their school, they run the risk of making a decision that's more costly in the long term than paying a quarter of tuition for distance learning would be, because it could end up ultimately delaying their graduation or reducing their financial aid. So the same goes for incoming freshmen who might be considering deferring enrollment until classes are in person. So first of all, a lot of schools do not let you defer one term. They make you defer an entire year. So you could be delaying your admission by a year if you choose to defer. Others require that if you take classes before coming, that if you accrue more than a certain number of classes, that you're actually coming in now as a transfer student and not as a freshman. And a lot of financial aid is only offered to freshmen. On the other hand, there may be schools that are incredibly flexible about this. So really, your best bet is to ask. I think it's really important to remember that for all we see colleges as passion and fit and in this really special place and special time, they're businesses too, and they got walloped by the coronavirus the same way that a lot of other businesses did. Their revenues way down and their expenses went way up. So a lot of them honestly are grasping at every opportunity to monetize their students, I hate to say it, or at least to discourage their students from taking their money elsewhere. Mm-hmm. And while I said that, I also don't want to come across as being overly negative towards colleges, because this is really an extraordinary time for them too. And many are doing absolutely everything in their power to do right by their students, including having options for students who are concerned about returning to campus or struggling with distance learning, or any of the many things, have financial or suffering financial consequences of the pandemic, or whatever. So again, to make a short story long, reach out to your school and find out what their policy is if you choose not to come back for the fall.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Great. So and you may have touched on this in your last answer, but the related question I have for you is what I'm wanting to understand is for families that have a student that is, let's say, on the East Coast and they're based here in Oregon, and they're trying to decide, should I go back and do digital learning back in my the community where my college is, or should I stick around here? It occurs to me that maybe they could have a conversation with their college about their potential hardships. And I'm just curious, have you heard if colleges are negotiating with families, or is everybody's situation really the same to them unless they have financial aid?
So I think every college is handling this a little bit differently, and so really, the best thing is talk to the school themselves. And and the other side of it is there are a lot of students who are currently studying across the country, or studying from home at a school that's across the country, who aren't wanting to go back, or whose families don't feel comfortable sending them back in airplanes to places that are far away in the midst of the pandemic. And if that's your situation, by all means, research your options closer to home, because the other thing that schools are finding is there's a lot less students have committed to enroll for the fall. So chances are, if you wanted to make a big change like that, chances are your in-state public school is looking for some more students. I know that NACAC, which is the I'm going to get the acronym wrong, National Association of College Admissions Counselors, I think. They publish a list every year, the first week of May, of what schools have excess enrollment or have enrollment capacity. And the last few years, it's averaged about 400 schools on that list. This year it was over 700 when the list came out the first week of May, and that's with not even all schools reporting, because so many pushed their acceptance deadline back to June 1st or July 1st. So the other side of that is if you're thinking of changing your plans, not just for the fall, but potentially for the next couple of years, there are probably going to be good options for you to stay closer to home as well, but involving transferring and all of that, which is certainly not anything that we want our students to do, but there are going to be a lot of cases where it just doesn't make good sense for a student to return across the country, or to a faraway location in the current environment. But again, it's a conversation to have with your school. When you're already enrolled somewhere, you have a relationship with that school, and chances are that school values that relationship with you and is going to want to do right by you to the best that they're able. All right. Well, are there any other questions for us? Because I know we're coming up on 6 o'clock, the witching hour, or just the same as just about every hour these days. All right, well, let's, I guess we'll call it an evening. Thank you so much, Victoria. It was great to have you here. Really appreciate your, all your insights.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you for having me.